Hi, welcome to History Respawned. I'm your host, Bob Whitaker. On today's episode, we'll be playing Age of Empires 4. And joining me on this episode, as usual, for these streams, is John Harney. Hey, John, how are you doing?
I'm good, Bob. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. So, John, you and I, we've been playing Age of Empires 4. We've been playing it on PC via Xbox Game Pass. And this is a game that is really kind of a remake of Age of Empires 2, which came out in September of 1999. So, John, I'm wondering, where were you in 1999, and were you playing Age of Empires 2?
I graduated high school in 1999. That's the number from that year. And I don't remember playing Age of Empires 2. This is terrible. Age of Empires 3, I just completely missed. And for me, 1 and 2 are a bit of a blur together. And fairly or unfairly, I always kind of thought of them as like the kind of history / real world alternative to StarCraft or to Warcraft, whereas Warcraft was like the fantasy games, and these games felt a bit different. The timelines don't really match up, but like that's just my hazy memory of it. I definitely played a bunch of the first one, and I'm pretty confident I played the second one when I should have been sitting in college classes, almost certainly.
Yeah.
How about you? I mean, what's your Age of Empires experience?
Well, so I was really into real-time strategy games growing up, and I was very lucky to go to a school where a group of my friends, they had computers, mostly parents' computers that they were allowed to game on after work hours were done. And so we would play online matches, in Warcraft 2 was a big one, a little bit of StarCraft, not really a big fan of StarCraft myself, a little bit too fast-paced for me, but then Command and Conquer, and then Command and Conquer Red Alert. And so then this game came out, and I was the one in my friend group in high school that was really, really into this because I'm a huge history nerd. And I got caught up in the fact that this game did something that a lot of RTS games did at the time, which was have a story-driven campaign, right? You can remember the storyline for the Orcs in Warcraft 2, or the Alliance in Warcraft 2, or, Nod, or the Soviet Union in a Command and Conquer game. And I loved the storylines. I think my other friends, they were into the gameplay, and I was just like, oh, look at this FMV sequence. This is amazing. And I think this game, Age of Empires 4, kind of captures some of that late 90s feel to games. It is very much in its gameplay style. It's just kind of a copy and paste of Age of Empires 2. But also, in addition to the real-time strategy mechanics, it's got these FMV videos to go along with the storyline of whatever campaign you're playing. And obviously the production values have improved, but at the same time, it definitely does something that Age of Empires 2 did, which is kind of draw you in to a historical narrative and, make it feel as though you are, playing a role in the past. And I think that is, it's kind of piqued my interest, but I also wonder how interesting is this type of game for somebody who's younger, somebody who doesn't have those memories like we do of RTS games or of games in the late 90s.
Yeah, I mean, it's so it's fascinating. It's like it demands to be the ultimate kind of history buff game in the sense of the History Channel before Ice Truckers. You know what I mean? Like that's what this game is.
Yeah.
England defeated the French at the Battle of Bremeux.
Like, this is amazing to me. I love this so much. It's just crazy. But like, for especially people watching who live in Britain or who have access to British television, this presentation style will be very, very, very familiar. This is a kind of a certain type of history TV show you see on British television all the time. And I'm not used to seeing it in a video game.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really fascinating. So we are here playing the campaign for the Normans. So this takes us through the Plantagenet era of English history, kind of 12th century. going into the early 13th century. And this is an era of history that's really popular within Europe. I don't know how popular it is within the rest of the world. You know, it's kind of one of these weird things studying British history. People in Britain are really interested in this type of history, but people outside of Britain not too interested in the Plantagenet era. But at the same time, they do a really good job here of these, like you said, BBC Two documentary style of drawing you into the narrative, and they focus on the figures of kings and queens, right? And so it's kind of the leadership position, and you know, kind of glossing over a lot of details about what's going on underneath these kings and queens and these nobility figures. So but that's par for the course when it comes to these kind of style of documentaries.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that. Like, I've been to see the Bayeux Tapestry, you know, when I was younger, and like these are just things you just do. And I've been to York, which features earlier in this campaign. This video I found fascinating. This is just, you know, Lincoln today, you know, and they look at the superimposing these troops over it. I just find that to be a fascinating choice. Like, and for people who go on who play the game, you know, you'll see all these like Toyota vans and stuff driving through the streets of these English towns. It's just with these horses suddenly riding superimposed over them. I find it completely discordant, but I don't dislike it, if that makes any sense.
Well, and I think they know their audience. You know, I think that we've talked in the past about, you know, historical books that are kind of like dad books or uncle books, you know, things that you go and pick up at the bookstore. And I think this game is a game that's built for dads. You know, it's like,
yes,
if there was a dad
in a non-gendered sense,
yeah,
spiritual sense of being a dad. Yeah,
if there was a dad book equivalent in video game terms, this would be that game. And these are the type of people that watch those kind of historical documentaries while they fall asleep, you know, next to a glass of scotch, you know. And so I think they know their audience, but I'm left wondering, in all of this kind of presentation, is this really something that's of interest to younger players, right? I mean, I can see the appeal for people like us, middle-aged, but, you know, what does this work for players who are younger? Are they interested in this presentation style, and are they interested in RTS games? Like, I just don't know.
Right. I think that you know, last year for the Goatees we had like a dad book or dad game rather category, and I think that we have a winner this year. Spoiler alert! Like this has to be it.
Yeah,
this is it. But no, I think that's a great point. And, you know, we talked about this in a podcast recently, and part of me wonders, like, is this game evidence that there just is a middle-aged market in games now? Because there is one. I mean, train simulation games exist for a reason, and I'm only partly being facetious there. But yeah, like, I'm just so used to RTSs shooting for those younger or for larger audiences. And what I will say is that the game is quite impressive gameplay wise, I think, because it's this is what RTSs were like in the 90s. But yeah, there's lots of little tweaks, many of which barely visible, that really make the game like playable. Do you know what I mean? Like even Age of Empires remastered on Xbox Game Pass also, it just felt a bit, there was little things I didn't notice. Well, they didn't annoy me in 1999. They kind of were annoying me in 2018. But this game, they've sanded off a lot of those edges. So I think it's, gameplay-wise, it's pretty accessible if you like the idea of selecting a bunch of guys and pressing Control 1 and another group of guys and pressing Control 2. And yeah.
It's a,
so
it's
I
like
just
a
defeated
religious sacrament is pressing Control 1.
So do our younger viewers even know that's a thing, really? I mean, what was the last big RTS, really? I mean, that wasn't a remake or a remaster.
Yeah, StarCraft 2. Maybe? Yeah, StarCraft 2, and that was a decade ago.
15 years old, or 10 years old, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, it is more than 10 years old, because I was watching that on research trips in 08, 09.
Oh, wow.
Watching StarCraft 2 esports.
So one of the things that's new in this is the stealth mode, right? You can go into these forested areas and launch an attack. And so that's kind of fun. That was definitely not in the original Age of Empires 2 but one of the kind of weird things with the control in this, and you can probably get a sense of this as I'm moving the camera, is that this is as close as the camera gets, is my current perspective. And then this is as far away as the camera gets. And I can remember being younger and playing these games and being able to almost look at half the map all at once. And for this game, they kind of limit you as to how close you can get to units, and then how far away you can get from them as well. So, I don't know, that's just kind of a slight annoyance, just kind of a mechanical annoyance that I've got with this game.
But I wonder too, like, I mean, you know, when you boot it up at the start of the episode, and you can see that kind of opening menu system, really, it really reminds me of kind of like a console, like an Xbox 360 or something, kind of the Blades type thing, where we'll move you from place to place. So they have their own little ecosystem for people who want to play the game, which is kind of interesting to me. So yeah, there's tutorials and stuff in there, but again, we keep asking this question for newer players: how would they get into it? And then this idea of what the History Dad game is. Yeah, I love the analogy of, like, this is the video game version of the massive biography you get your dad, uncle, aunt, whatever. But how do I put it? I don't know. Like, this game is kind of expects you to know what you want out of it or something. You know, like, it's just. While saying that, though, you're now doing a pretty kind of a structured thing. Maybe I just don't remember this from the campaigns, but like I don't remember it being this granular. Like, hide in these ambushes and then do this and then do that and then do this.
And you know, in the Normans, this is the first campaign that they offer you. I think you can jump into any of the campaigns that you want, but they encourage you to do the Norman campaign first, I think, because this is a kind of a tutorial campaign. So I feel like that kind of granular approach is, to a certain extent, limited in other campaigns. I've been playing the Mongol campaign as well. And so that one is a little bit more hands-off, although there are mechanical reasons why there are some more detailed explanations for the Mongols, primarily because, well, we'll look at it here in a few moments, but mechanical reasons why they're drawing you along.
Well, let me ask you too, Bob, because you would actually be more familiar. I know that it's not really your field this early in British history, but you'd be a little bit more familiar than I would with this particular thing. What do you think of the game's depiction of the Norman conquest of Britain?
Well, I think that it makes some interesting decisions. It kind of jumps around in ways that I wouldn't expect. So thinking back to Age of Empires 2, and, you know, don't quote me on this, but from what I remember, Age of Empires 2 kind of focuses on the career. When it comes to the English, it kind of focuses on the career of Henry II and his family. And this is a really, really popular basis for historical fiction. You've got the very, very famous film with Katharine Hepburn and Peter O'Toole, with O'Toole playing Henry II, Lion in Winter, which won all sorts of awards. Very famous film, very popular basis for you know, historical television shows, because you've got Henry II being the father, being in a relationship with Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of these, you know, most famous women in history, or one of the most famous, certainly in the Middle Ages. And then you've also got you know, Henry II's sons, who include Richard the Lionheart, very famous in the Crusades, and then also with Robin Hood films, and then of course King John as well, famous for the Magna Carta, and famous also usually for Robin Hood stories and films as well. And so it's interesting to me that they skip over Henry II here, and they do William the Conqueror, they do his sons, and then they jump ahead past Henry II, and they start in with King John, Magna Carta, and the results of the Magna Carta, you know, the conflict between King John and the bishops, or not the bishops, the barons, right? The barons throughout England. And so it's just an interesting decision from my perspective. Now, I'm sure somebody more familiar with this history would, have a different perspective. It's totally fine. I'm not a medieval historian. But it is kind of strange to me. I feel like they went with something that was a little bit unexpected from my perspective. And instead of going for the easy layup, they went for other battles and other eras of this era of history. So I think, that's kind of fun. I mean, I feel like I learned a little bit about medieval battles in England, so that's always fun. But it's kind of strange, but maybe they figured because they did that in Age of Empires 2, or at least Ensemble Studios did that in Age of Empires 2, maybe they shouldn't replicate it with this game.
Right. No, it's quite interesting as well because, we kind of looked at the videos a few minutes ago, but then it's intriguing showing like present day Lincoln, present day York and so on, and the troops kind of coming around it. There seems to be it's a thing in British history, of course, where the Norman conquest, I guess, ostensibly is a French conquest of Britain, but that's not really what it was, right? So like I'm kind of, part of me wonders if there's a little bit of deconstruction going on there of the kind of classic British narratives. As old fashioned as it looks, they've made some interesting decisions there with that.
Right.
So that would be interesting to me if that's the case.
Yeah. Well, and we're definitely going to do an episode of this featuring a medieval historian, a guest scholar. I think that goes without saying. I've been talking to Daniel Mileno, our medievalist friend, who's done episode with us on Assassin's Creed Valhalla. And is a long-time Age of Empires player. I think very, very interested in this game. So I'll be curious to kind of pass this by him and maybe some other scholars to get their sense of this. Because, when you think to, for our generation of scholars, kind of just now professionals, some of us tenured by this point, these types of games had a very eager market with our type of, historians, people living in North America, Western Europe, during the late 90s. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if there were way more medievalists like Daniel who played the hell out of Age of Empires 2 when it first came out. And I think it's important to kind of mention here that I think for younger players, they might not understand the lineage of Age of Empires. So the original development studio was Ensemble Studio, which was partnered with Microsoft to create games in the late 90s. So they did Age of Empires, they did Age of Empires 2 and 3, and then they did some other real-time strategy games. I think they even made a Halo strategy game sometime in the mid-2000s. But this particular series, Age of Empires, it was developed by Bruce Shelley, and Bruce Shelley was famous for being a close partner with Sid Meier on Civilization and Railroad Tycoon and a lot of the Microprose historical strategy games that came out in the late 80s, early 1990s. And so when you hear Bruce Shelley talk about Age of Empires, the whole point of this series was to kind of create the feel of a Civilization game, moving through different eras of history, but to do so within like a 30 to 40 minute time span, in a real-time strategy level, something that wouldn't take you hours or days with a Civilization campaign. So this game is kind of specifically built to be like a Civ Lite, basically.
Right. And this is something that we, Bob, you and I both teach courses in history of video games, and some of the students have asked me recently, because I'm teaching in January, will we do the history of games? I'm like, well, I don't typically plan to do that. When I've done it in the past, I've done history of the industry type stuff, but this is weird for me to think about. But you think back to the CRPGs of the 80s and the extent to which they were attempts to use computers to do Dungeons and Dragons, and the RTS in some ways is a computer version of the tabletop kind of stuff. But like in the 90s, at least in Western Europe where I was in Ireland, the RTS was the thing on the PC.
Mm-hmm.
And the soccer management was the other thing, which probably wasn't a thing in North America.
Not at all.
And then, but then you would play the PlayStation was king in the mid 90s. So the PlayStation was what you played certain games on, and PC games were more or less RTS things. Now, obviously, first person shooters were a staple on PCs, and again, this is probably anecdotal. It is anecdotal, but for my peers and for me, and maybe we were particularly nerdy, they were RTS machines. That's what PCs were.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a glory day of RTSs. And so now Age of Empires 4 we are not living in a glory age of RTSs. And yet it's the same kind of game, I think it's a really good 2021 version of what those games were, actually.
Yeah.
To be fair, it's good. Like, I mean, and if people are watching and are thinking, oh yeah, I don't have any background in RTSs, this would be worth a shot, especially if you have Game Pass. This would definitely be worth a look.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point, John, because gaming back in the 90s, even into the mid 2000s, it was really, consoles and platforms were really divided based on what genre of game they supported. And so, like you said, PCs were kind of a place where you had RTS games, strategy games, flight simulators, right? Military simulator games. And then consoles were for basically everything else, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
Well, sorry, and that's why Halo was such a big deal.
Yes,
exactly. Because they figured out FPSs on consoles. The console basically is taking that genre from PCs. Yes. Now, that didn't quite turn out to be that, but Halo did that, Okay. And Halo Wars was an attempt to do that with RTSs. Yeah. And it just didn't work. Halo Wars was famously derided for having a button that just controlled all your armies simultaneously, which is what you're not supposed to do that. But then I would always play campaigns and just play it that way because, like you were saying earlier, Bob, I actually just kind of wanted the story beats anyway. Yeah. And I enjoyed watching my armies tear cities to shreds. I didn't care too much that I wasn't doing it properly. Then you go and play multiplayer where it's just hilarious. Like there's literally a recipe of guys you're supposed to build inside 35 seconds. Yeah, maybe that was StarCraft 2.
You'll notice here that I do not have a clear sense of the build order for these things, but I do know that I need to make sure I protect these walls. I have played this campaign level before, and so actually I might need to bring these troops back. I was going to go get them healed, but it doesn't look like I'm going to have time. But so here you've got kind of one of the interesting things that Age of Empires 2 introduced, which were kind of real base defenses. So in other RTS games in the mid 90s, late 90s, kind of turtling up and protecting your base was definitely a thing. But at the same time, there wasn't these kind of aesthetically pleasing walls that you could defend and that you could build upon and kind of develop in the same way that you could with Age of Empires. So that kind of made Age of Empires stand out to a great degree, was that if you were somebody who was interested in what we would say now turtling up and building a really pretty base and kind of filling it with nice looking buildings and lovely farms and everything, this is a game series that would let you do that, no problem.
It's funny because that's my memory of Age of Empires from back in the 90s, is I remember building the farms and I remember the base building. Mm-hmm. I don't remember much of the combat at all. And that was, of course, was such a huge part of this entire genre, was the base building stuff. And in single player, you could actually enjoy that and like have a mini city builder with some fighting in it. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't a need to build, like a build order, like this many barracks and that kind of stuff in the single player. And, a lot of people who played RTSs in the 90s were avid multiplayer players, but a lot of us were like you and me, Bob, were just playing for the story, playing for the basic mechanics. It's kind of crazy to think now, because the single player RTS tends to be a very heavily structured experience, even if it's just build a base here and kill that other base. Mm-hmm. It's just a kind of it's kind of fascinating how my expectations and expectations of game players have changed so much now, that you can't really do that.
Yeah.
And even this modern game now is not really. I mean, yes, in the campaign, I suppose it's doing that, but even the FMVs and stuff are kind of breaking it up.
Yeah. And I mean, looking at this, and I'm enjoying myself, and I'm having fun playing this, but it's mostly kind of built off nostalgia. And kind of like, oh look, I've got my castle, and I've got this kind of narrative campaign that I'm playing through, and I know how to control this. I know what my base should look like. And I just kind of wonder, for younger players, is that something that has any meaning? Like, is this something that's interesting to them? I mean, I don't know. I'd be really curious to hear the opinion of somebody under the age of 30 about this game,
I was gonna, it's funny because I'm getting little bits of nostalgia from your army just kind of being this little amorphous blob that's flinging around, and the game's pathfinding's quite good, right? They're all finding their way around. But like today, if you want, how do I put it? This was what Total War games were coming in around I think the early to mid 2000s, I guess, or maybe late 90s. But nowadays, if you wanted, a kind of authentic or, a war experience, you probably, Total War is a good option for you, as it were. Like, there is something in being faithful to the 90s style in this game. There's something very, abstract and purposefully weird about it, that you can, and even if you were, being super diligent and sorting out into different groups and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I don't know, like, the Total War games really want you to think about your front, right?
Yeah.
And think about flanks and think about formations and things. This game does not care about those things, really.
Yeah,
I mean, it has flanking.
You got some formations here, but nothing really that important. Yeah, nothing that's
not really.
Yeah,
it's really unit composition in a game like this.
Yeah,
it is really what it is. And so, I mean, I think it's just a great question, because maybe a younger player, we should both do this with students, actually, Bob. We should do this experiment in the classroom and just see what kind of reaction we get. Because I'm sure a lot of them will just be bewildered because they've probably just never seen a game like this before.
Yeah. Well, and if anything, it might remind them of MOBAs, right? And not really, thinking in terms of any kind of grand strategy or anything like that. This is a game that is built off of unit movement, basically. And sure, you have to have a sequence of building and, what kind of units you're going to build in a base, but also it's a kind of game that, could just as easily be about moving units along a map and kind of, fighting your creeps and, fighting the enemy's heroes, that kind of thing.
It really does look lovely as well. Like those walls look great. It's a really lovely looking game.
Gotta send these guys after here.
And it's funny, I over the years in history Respawn, it's just kind of interesting. I often feel that, often in a very kind of a gentle and very constructive way, we kind of immediately are reacting against various assumptions about history and popular media when we want to talk about these games. We don't really care it's not that we don't care what the game is saying, but we're more interested in how the game is saying it. But those kind of things we've spent years and years talking to people about. This game feels to me like a complete refutation of that. Like, this game is just, this game is what people think of when they think of what a history video game would be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's just, and it seems very proud of that fact and very, very unself-conscious about that, which I admire it for that. Be yourself.
Yeah. This game is all about enthusiasm. It's not going to be caught up with trying to be historically accurate or trying to worry too much about the nitty-gritty details of the past. But instead it's about like, hey, isn't it fun just to like move around a knight on, a chessboard, basically, a glorified chessboard here with this RTS setup. So yeah, it's fun, but yeah, I sit here every 10 minutes and I'm like, oh, this is great. And then I'm like, yeah, but who's playing this? Like, are there really that many people still my age who are interested in replaying these kinds of campaigns. And then are they gaining any new players? I still just absolutely befuddled by that idea. Like, is this really something that people want to play in this day and age?
And how would theoretically there'd be a market there if people who haven't played a video game in 20 years but would play this? So how do they find out it exists? And
no kidding.
The simple question could be advertising, I guess. And I shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that video games are that siphoned off from other things. But in the way that there are people who buy a PlayStation 5 to play Madden on it, right? There could theoretically be a certain kind of person our age who makes sure they've got a decent gaming laptop or just a decent laptop to play Age of Empires on. I mean, theoretically that would be a market, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Oh, it looks like we're out of stone. Well, I can't remember if I need stone in order to save these walls.
Sorry, this whole little algorithmic thing you're going through now is just this wave of nostalgia, an almost physical sense of nostalgia of playing these games. I'm like, oh crap, my resource is gone.
Yeah, then I've got burning oil coming down here. That worked pretty well.
But like for us, Dune 2000 was such a huge thing. Or Dune 2, which was not quite, but is often seen as the first of these games. Mm-hmm. And again, so we have all this kind of built-in memory and recollection of all this stuff that people don't have.
Yeah. Look at this destruction of this wall here. That looks really nice.
That's great.
It's just kind of again. It's one of these things where it's like, oh yeah, sure. I could see kind of the appeal of this. Boy, and I'm really messing things up here. I need to bring this army back out here. I was healing.
Well, should we? Yeah.
I was healing them.
Well, should we jump to the Mongols? I guess.
Yeah, maybe we should. Yeah, I'll save myself the embarrassment of losing this wall. Let's see.
Well, very, very persistent, but not. Very persistent attackers, but not waiting until they can all attack. Just, one by one, again and again and again.
Okay, yeah, let's quit. Yes. Get rid of that. And then we will come over here to the Mongols. And I think we were interested in taking a look at the Mongols here. And then what we should do is we're going to get this video, I think, at the Great Wall when we start. But let's take a look at one of these side videos, just a kind of quick description of the Mongol horse here.
The Mongol Empire.
So these are videos, some of which that play during the campaign, in between missions. But you also, as an achievement, after you beat certain missions, you gain access to additional videos. So that includes the Battle of Lincoln that we just played, where you get a video of a modern-day trebuchet and how it works. And then here you get a description of horses, the importance of horses and the types of horses used by the Mongol Empire.
Is an expert on this breed.
The Mongolian steppe is very cold.
This is so fascinating to me. This is literally like the guy who played Baldric in Blackadder's about to come on and give us the camera work. It's just
John,
so reminiscent of British TV shows.
I just remembered I have to show you this video that is about the composite bow. You have to see this.
Okay.
On what was naturally available from the land.
This is all like, a nice, engaging, well-produced version of videos they showed us in high school.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's just the tone of it is just kind of mesmerizing to me.
Yes. It's just odd. I just think the whole thing is odd. I like it.
Yeah.
But it's just like, who's this for? I don't know.
I feel the same way. I said to you before we started recording, I just have this urge to make fun of this game, even though I do like it. But I don't want to disparage it. I don't want to be seen to be complaining about it, because it's just kind of a bewildering experience. Like, this is all great. The way he's standing up in the stirrups there, this is some nice little camera work. This is cool stuff, and I think that
Today's Mongolian
I don't know if it's a video game audience, but like the history buff audience would eat this stuff up.
Yeah.
This is great.
person at speed
I would think they would eat up these videos, but I still wonder, would they eat up the game? You know, would they want to play an RTS? I just don't know. But maybe if they're that interested in these kind of videos, maybe there is kind of a, you know, like the Venn diagram. It overlaps completely. You know, it's like people interested in these types of videos of the past are also completely on board for real-time strategy games. And again, I think if we're looking at this in terms of game mechanics, this is still a type of game that is appealing from Bruce Shelley's initial perspective, which is create a strategy game, a kind of a grand strategy game that doesn't take as long as Civilization or Humankind or Total War, right? Because those take a long time. Mm-hmm. Okay, so
and you might never finish them.
That's
whereas
right.
This is much more. Yeah.
Okay. Now check out this guy, this scholar, who's an expert on these composite bows.
The Mongol bow was part of a family of bows. Different cultures made these in varying shapes, but they were all made of the same materials.
And we've got the volume down here. But just get a look at this guy.
Oh my god. Oh my god. That's how he wrote into the tenure meeting, you know? Like, I love it. Oh my goodness.
You know, and he looks so unassuming here. You know, he's just sitting down, he's got his glasses on, and he's just kind of talking about these bows. And you're like, oh yeah, okay. All right, sure dude. Sure dude. And then they show these sequences here where he gets on the horse, he's got his glasses off, and he's like Rambo.
Yeah, I know. This is nuts. This is so funny.
Of the bow are non-bending. They act as levers that allow you to draw a much stronger
So they're talking about the kind of a bone end of composite bows, this part that doesn't bend, so it gives you the strong shot.
And this is something I think that this kind of quote-unquote old-fashioned history stuff doesn't always get credit for. You know, because it's a bit grognardy, right? And it's a bit Sunday afternoon, falling asleep in front of the TV.
It's a bit rivet counting, you know, honestly.
Yeah. But you know, this is effectively a history of technology take, really. Yeah. This whole video. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's kind of back in vogue in the last 10 years. And that was always something this kind of approach tended to do. Mm-hmm. This is just kind of, you know.
And I think, you know, and that kind of history is appealing for players of real strategy games, real time and otherwise grand strategy games, because, you know, it distills history down to something that they would understand and that they could engage with, because it's related to technology and military strength and, you know, great kings and great generals. And it's when you get into, you know, kind of social dynamics, economic dynamics over the course of centuries that I think you really lose that audience, right? And there's something to be said though for the appeal, I think, of this kind of more simplistic, though not interesting, but simplistic version of the past.
What I think that I agree. I think historians sometimes can get a bit sidetracked. We have this a lot teaching undergraduates, right? Where like you just
look at this guy.
It's amazing. It's just amazing. I love it. It's like, you know, take that, reviewer.
Peer review this. Yeah.
So good. Oh my goodness, that was amazing.
Yeah. All right. So let's.
But like we do, because, you know, teaching undergraduates, you can't teach the stuff you thought you would when you're in grad school, really. Mm-hmm. Although you kind of can actually in bursts, but you also got to give them some sense of the basics of what the heck happened in the 50 years surrounding the thing you want to talk about. Mm-hmm. And so there is a proven audience for this approach to history. The challenge is how to kind of tap into that.
Yeah. So here we've got the Mongol campaign.
So she pronounces it Genghis, but they're still spelling it kind of slightly out of date way.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
overflowed with riches.
I mean, it's a bit, this happens. I mean, so technically it could be Chinggis, Chinghs, but it's one of these things where Genghis Khan in that spelling has been seen so many times. It's not worth trying to shift it now in some cases. but she is pronounced it with a kind of a j sound instead of the Genghis. So that's kind of an intriguing little thing. Beautiful camera work at this game.
Yeah.
Oh my god,
It's great, isn't it?
oh my goodness. It's also very it being so long ago as well really makes it very it complements a lot of different countries and how they want to talk about their past. Like, you know, the Chinese government is not going to have any issue with this game, you know, nor, you know, and and talk about the Normans in Britain is really not a controversial thing at this point, you know. But it allows you these beautiful sweeping camera shots of these cities, the Great Wall, and so on and so on. There's something very conservative about this game.
Yeah.
Well, small c.
Yeah, and I think too with, and I'm a modern historian, but I don't think I'd be speaking out of turn here when it comes to medieval history and, you know, kind of worldwide medieval history and medieval historiography. There is a narrative pattern that's developed over the centuries that has gotten very good at telling these types of stories, you know, the kind of the rise of the Mongols,
yes,
you know, through Genghis Khan, and, you know, the rise of the Normans through William the Conqueror. Those are very well-worn narrative paths in historical narratives, right? Historiography. And I think it has been the work of scholars over the past, 40 years or so to kind of overcome those narratives, to tell different stories in the medieval past. And yet, it's not like those books on the Middle Ages based on the great men or the great battles. It's not like those books have been destroyed or thrown away, right?
Right.
And so they're there, right? Those narratives are still there to be told and to be represented over and over again. And so it's like, well, medieval historiography has gone in many different directions now, but I think the kind of interest of the public in medieval history is still dictated by a lot of those more established narratives.
Well, and it's slightly facetious, I guess, but I'll still sometimes read an older book in my field to actually know what the heck happened, to be refreshed what actually happened, because we don't really do that anymore. We don't cover like the actual things that happened. That's not entirely fair, but I think people can be very open to the whole historiographical approach, right? If this is the argument that's there. But at the end of the day, sometimes you just want to get just tell me what happened, I'm intelligent enough to understand it's a take, but just give me a take that I can watch while I'm making dinner or whatever. This is fascinating. So the maps look completely different. Like they've really made a real effort to show the topographical and ecological
changes. Yep.
That's good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's great.
Yeah. And of course, when you're talking about the Great Wall and Mongolia, you're not going to get, pictures of modern day Lincoln or York, with Volkswagens driving around.
Right.
So again, it's kind of frustrating. This is as close as I can get to these units. I don't know. They look nice and detailed, but I don't know. Just as a player, I'm just a little bit frustrated. I'd like to get right next.
And I wonder what's happening under the hood. I have 8 gigs of RAM on my machine, and the game kind of complains whenever I boot it up that it's worried I won't have enough RAM. And 8 gigs is a bit 8 gigs is a bit mild by today's standards, but still, I just wonder what's happening under the hood there.
Yeah. So
that could explain why you can't zoom out.
Yeah, maybe so. We've got for the Mongols, we've got the famous ranged cavalry. We've got the lancers, and then we've got Genghis Khan here in the back. And with these leaders, they have special abilities. So Genghis can do charge arrow, which increases armor. Later on, if you get to the feudal age, you can do raiding arrow, and then defense arrow if you get to castle age. So in each one of these instances, we've got a kind of specific power that, relates to a hero class in an RTS game. And, it's kind of fun. It gives you a historical figure that you can, use in the game mechanics. But then also, if you are a super nerd, you can kind of play act as Genghis Khan. You were taking on his role as you're playing the game. And I gotta say, I found this stuff very, very attractive when I was a teenager. Playing Age of Empires 2, I thought it was really compelling. But I wonder, does this work for younger players? And I don't know. I just don't know.
Well, I haven't played this particular campaign yet. I'm just curious because, of course, in real life, there had always been, or certainly for centuries, there had been these horseback peoples to the north of China, and sometimes they'd been quite successful, particularly with the kind of the Song dynasty ahead of this. But of course, Genghis Khan's big achievement was uniting everybody under his rule, and then of course he dies in the course of the Chinese conquest. He doesn't live to see the conquest completed, so he dies in China during this. And then the other part of it, I have no idea if the game will do this or not. The early years of the conquest, the early decades, it took them about half a century to do it. They just tore through the north of China, as they had done in lots of other places, and just burned, killed, scorched earth type approach. And then by the time they took over, however, they'd reached a kind of an agreement with the existing elites, and then just took them over. And so the next Chinese dynasty was led by Mongols, and famously by Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan. So I have no idea if the campaign will get into any of that kind of stuff. But going back to the point you're making about, this being compelling to newer players and younger players and so on, I wonder, I'm curious, because the videos that I've seen so far are very kind of in the moment type videos. Tonight, in this recording. But the Norman Conquest, which I've played more of, definitely is doing a bit more of kind of this is what is happening and taking you through a kind of a historical narrative.
Yeah. And it does that here too, I think, with the Mongols. I've only played a few missions, but it does give you kind of a perspective built around Mongolian leaders, Mongolian generals. But, not much more than that. Yeah, you wouldn't really know from this what were the kind of social and political dynamics that were drawing the Mongolians out and, pulling them into particular regions. None of that is kind of discussed, but it's kind of, is it the game's fault for that? Or is it their job? It's not really. Yeah.
Well, it's a challenge of medieval history too, and of course, medievalists would kill me for saying something like this. But it's like it's horrible. The Mongols did in China was horrible. It's just an awful, irredeemable thing.
We should also preface this with medievalists are probably the hardest working historians out there. They have to learn historiography that goes back to the 18th century. They're responsible for learning multiple languages, many of them dead languages, and they also have to deal with a lot of, dumbass Martinists like us who just kind of wade into their histories and just like, let me correct this view on the Plantagenets, no problem, I got this.
And everyone kind of, I've got the broad strokes, right? Yeah. Dark Ages. That's if you ever want to drive a poor medievalist into a pure rage, just use the term Dark Ages.
1066 and all that, right? Yeah.
But I'm thinking now, it's funny, one of the things that always strikes me, Bob, when I'm teaching undergraduates, and at Center, they're typically the quote-unquote traditional 18 to 22, for the most part, age. Because of my own interests, I kind of have this assumption that they all like games, and it's just not true. A lot of them just don't really care. And I'm thinking right now, as you're playing this, a couple of students I know that I'm teaching right now, actually, I could see them being into this, and they're not really gamers per se in that kind of classic sense. but I could see them getting into this. And a lot of the things that hardcore game players would find frustrating of like, well, it looks like you can just play it by selecting all and, you know, destroying the buildings or whatever. It's like, yeah, but if you're kind of in it for the vibe, that's great. That's one of the great things about this genre of game.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't need to be an RTS master to enjoy an RTS game if it's good RTS.
Yeah. And, you know, I would say this is a game back in 99 that got me really interested in military history and the relationship between military history and society. You know, I was watching a lot of historical documentaries back then, John Keegan documentaries and stuff, and I never really got interested in medieval history. I mean, I don't know about you, John, but once you learn about the effects of the Industrial Revolution, you could just never go back. I mean, it's like, this is like, how could you not want to study this? And so I was never really interested in medieval history, but, you know, this is the game, Age of Empires 2, that taught me what a trebuchet was, right? And, you know, who Joan of Arc was. Like, I had no idea about those things before I started playing this game in 99, so I think... You know, it's not an educational game, but it's not as though you're not gleaning some historical information from these kinds of titles.
And it's funny because, you know, it's kind of a truism now that the campaign of an RTS is just this completely different beast from multiplayer. But I know there was multiplayer in 1999, but I wasn't playing multiplayer in 1999. I mean, I didn't have anything even approaching the kind of internet setup that you needed to do that. And even if you had the linkage, I know some games do this now, but like every game was find a lobby and actually have some sense of technical know-how. But my favorite thing about these games is if you've only ever played single player or enjoying them, and if you decide to join a multiplayer game with basically no prep, it is one of the most bizarre experiences you can have in video games. Because you'll just be annihilated by a stranger inside seconds.
Yes.
You know?
Oh, they will
you're sitting
wipe
there
the floor with you.
What happened? Yeah. You're like, what the heck? He just built a barracks and sent over 5 troops and killed you. And it's just kind of hilarious to me. But they did effectively exist as single player games the whole time.
Yes.
And so this stuff matters, this kind of storytelling or the base building. And again, the characteristics here of these, the buildings and everything, obviously it would be stupid if they looked exactly the same. People might think I'm damning it with faint praise here, but this is really nice art design here. This is cool stuff.
Well, in these buildings you can see here, this is kind of like a, with the Mongolian setup here, this is kind of a Command and Conquer field, you know, like Command and Conquer, famous for having the kind of constructor vehicle that you would have to drive into a base location and then start building buildings. And so you've got a little bit of that feel here with the Mongols, but the idea is that, you know, as a nomadic society, raiding society, they're willing to build, but then pick up, you know, right where they are and move somewhere else. And so in addition to using these vehicles to construct these buildings, we've got basically the Mongolian farm here, pasture. You can also move them at a moment's notice. So you can click this pack up button and then you can just move this somewhere else if you want. You can select a new base of operations. And so here's the town center. And we can build that right here, wherever we want. And there it goes. Kind of constructing.
That's a nice little manifestation of the nomadic nature of the people they're portraying here.
You can pack up if you want. You can move this somewhere else.
Very cool.
Yeah. So I thought it was pretty neat, and it definitely adds kind of a interesting gameplay wrinkle. I haven't played this game multiplayer against somebody else, but I could see this being kind of a fun thing where it's like, oh, you think my base is here, but actually I've already moved it 10 minutes earlier. And so, yeah, I think that'd be a lot of fun. But I don't think.
Here you're
yeah. Oh, keep going.
Well, sorry. Well, yeah, and you're competing with the Jin here, who are they had kind of knocked the Song down into the south, and they were kind of they were a Chinese dynasty-ish, but they were also descended from and were the kind of people of the steppes, just the Mongolians were. So the whole thing is a big, messy competition with all these different peoples from the north. And the Jin, well, later, many centuries later, the dynasty we know as the Qing, which was the last one in China, the one that abdicated in 1912. They were initially the later Jin. That's kind of what they saw themselves as. So there's a lot of kind of interesting. Northern Chinese history is very interesting that way, like so the Mongols, the classic kind of thing is that they're obviously external invaders, but the Chinese historians successfully kind of co-opt the Mongolian story. But the reality is that the politics of the northern China / Mongolia / southern Siberia really are, extremely southern Siberia stuff is just a fascinating thing of very deeply messy political and military competition. Rather than simply invasion by, a quote unquote civilized Chinese state by the Mongols. That's not really that simple.
Yeah, there you go. You can make you a medievalist yet, John.
The beauty of teaching undergraduates is you have to learn some of this stuff.
That's exactly true. I'm teaching Western Civ this semester, and I think a lot of historians kind of moved away from keeping Western Civ as a static entity, and so it's got a kind of worldwide perspective. And so we spent a good deal of time in that class talking about the Mongols and what's going on in China and what's going on in North and South America as you're getting the development of these medieval, early modern nation states at the same time. So yeah, like you said, when you're teaching undergraduates, when you're teaching at a teaching college like we are, then you kind of have to become a jack of all trades. So in one way, I have become a medievalist, and so I'm sure my 15-year-old self would be very proud. It's like, where will I be in 2021? Oh, I will be a professional historian, but still playing Age of Empires, and then I'm sure I've been thrilled with that outcome.
Pretty sweet. That's what young Bob is thinking right now.
All right. Well, I think that does it for the stream. John, you got anything else you want to mention or talk about?
No, other than just to, hopefully it's clear, but I think it's clear that I'm bewildered by this game, but I like it. I think, I don't know, I'm really glad this game exists as well. And I think that especially people who are watching who don't have RTS experience, don't get too intimidated by all those buttons and stuff down at the bottom. It's actually, it's more intuitive than it looks. And it would be worth a look. That's what I would tell people.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much, viewer, for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to keep up with History Respawn content, please visit our website at historyrespawn.com. And if you enjoy our work, please consider joining our Patreon at patreon.com/History Respawn. And until next time, goodbye.